A good way to learn any software is sometimes just to play around with things, and that's what this video is about. I made a map of the world out of New Zealand's. It's a kind of play on the common internet map meme where people highlight maps of the world that don't have New Zealand on them. And there's a Wikipedia page about it, there's a Reddit page, but for some reason people make world maps and they forget New Zealand, which is a terrible crime. So let's take a look at what I did. If I zoom into this map briefly, you can see that the world is made up of New Zealand's. And this is just an SVG file I grabbed off the internet. And what I did with the New Zealand's is I rotated them and resized them slightly depending on different values. But we'll look at that in a minute. For now, if I just double click on the layer called pasted, and then in the symbology section, what I've got is a single symbol, so this is a point layer. I'm using an SVG marker, and I've got a number of different settings. If I scroll down, you can see I'm pulling the SVG marker off the internet. If you've got an SVG on your computer, you can use one there by clicking the browse button. Sometimes it's better to download it, and that means if it's removed from the internet, it's still going to be in your map project. But for now, this is fine. So let's look at my workflow. And if you try this, it may be a little bit slow on your computer, depending on the spec of your computer, but don't worry about that. The method is the same, even if it is a bit slow on your machine. So the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to turn this off, and I'm going to go down to the bottom of the QGIS window to the coordinate box, delete the text that's there. I'll type in world, and I hit enter, and I get a world map. The first thing I'm going to do is just create some points. So I've got a world map, and I'm going to click on the toolbox icon. And here, what I'm going to do is type in grid. You can also get this via the vector menu, research tools, and create grid. But I find it easier to search in the processing toolbox because I don't need to remember then which toolbar or menu option it's in. So I'll double click create grid, and here I'm going to create a grid that's going to be a point grid. The extent of the grid, I'm going to choose calculate from layer, and that's going to be based on my world map layer. So I want a grid of points based on my world map layer. 1 degree spacing is fine, don't worry about the warnings. And the grid layer, I'm going to save the grid layer. Well, actually, if I'm going to save it, I would go to choose to save to GeoPackage, or if I want another format, I'll just save to file. So I can do that, but actually right now, I'm not going to save it. I'm just going to demonstrate the method. But if you want to save it, choose save to GeoPackage or save to another file format. I'll click run and then close. So we get lots of dots, which is fine, but I don't want dots everywhere. I just want dots that cover the area of the world. Now here's another little tip. Sometimes when you're doing this, things will be slow if you don't have a spatial index. So for the grid layer, I'll go to Vector, Data Management Tools, and create Spatial Index. For the grid layer, I'll click Run. There we go. Don't worry, it doesn't look like it's doing anything, and you might wonder why nothing happens. That's completely normal. I'll click Close. Now what I'm going to do is go to Vector, Research Tools, and select by location. So what I want to do here is I want to select those points that overlap the land. So I will select features from the grid, so that's my dots layer, that intersect the world map layer. And that's going to create a new selection. So if I hit run, let's see what happens. Sometimes you get an error with this, but if we do, we'll look at how to solve that. I'll hit run, and it was very fast. It's very fast on my machine. It might be a bit slower on yours, but the result is we can see all the points on land are selected. So we want to get a new layer out of that. So let's right click it, export, and then here, the important thing is to go to save selected features as. So those selected features are the yellow ones, the highlighted yellow ones. We're going to save all those as a new layer. So I'll click on that, and then we'll browse to the folder to save it to. I'm going to save it as a geo package, and I'll click on the browse button. Don't just type in the file name box, because if you do that, it probably won't work, because you'll be trying to save somewhere where perhaps you don't have permission to save to. So click on the browse button when you're doing this, and I'll do that now, and then we'll look at saving the file. I'll call this world points 1 degree. You can see I've already got one, so I'll just call this V2. Doesn't matter what you call it. I also usually, when I'm saving file names for geo packages, I usually copy the file name, then hit save. And then with a geo package, you've got a file name and a layer name. I like them to be the same. It doesn't matter. It just means that in your layers panel, it's a bit neater. So don't worry about it, but I like to do that, and it just makes things look nicer. If you're saving to another format, that doesn't apply. So I click OK, and then I'll turn the underlying grid off. I'll turn the world off. And now we've got is a bunch of dots that cover the world. So let's close the processing toolbox, and let's close the screen bar at the top. So that's all very well. What do we want to do now? We want to change these so that they are an SVG symbol rather than a dot. And that's fine. So how can we go about doing that? Well, if you go online, you can just Google New Zealand SVG. And you'll see a number of different shapes. If I go to the images section, there's one here, there's one here. So one on Wikipedia we can use. I'll click on that. And I think if I go here, yeah, let's use the Wikimedia one. I'll copy that URL. And then I'll go back to my new points layer, and I'll double click it. And that will take me to symbology. And at the moment it's all points. So it's a marker, and it's a simple marker is a specific kind of marker. So make sure you click on where it says simple marker. And then below that, we're going to change the symbol layer type here to SVG marker. Now, this is all very easy and straightforward if you're doing it a lot like I am. It's very quick, but if you don't know where to look, obviously that's part of the problem. So single symbol marker, but then you must click on simple marker. And then symbol layer type, change it to SVG marker. The thing I always find a bit confusing here is you do need to scroll down to see where you put in the actual SVG image. Now, if you've got an SVG file on your computer, you can click the browse button to find what it is and point to that. In this case, I'm just going to literally paste in the URL of the Wikimedia New Zealand that I found and click apply. And you should be able to see the world changes to New Zealand. Now, if I go up to the top, so I've scrolled back up, the default size will probably be 2, and that's quite small. So let's change it to 4 just so it's big enough to see. All right. And then I'll click OK. And we can zoom in and we see the whole world as New Zealand's. And I've used a 1 degree spacing, so it's about right. And let's click on the layer, go back to zoom to layer. So what else have I done with the version I showed you at the start? If I go to pasted, the pasted layer, there's a few things I've applied. So I've added, with my marker highlighted, I've added 50% opacity. And what I've also done in rotation, I've added a condition here. So if I edit that, we can see it. I've added rotation, so the rand thing here, rand minus 45, comma 45, that randomly rotates each SVG from minus 45 degrees to 45. So I've got a little bit of rotation. If I click on the SVG marker itself, we can see in the width, I've also used an expression. So let's look at that. Okay, that's also random size between 1.5 and 3. Okay, so we're doing this to add a little bit of variety to the map so it's not so uniform. And again, it's just playing around, and the rotation, we'll see the same thing in there. So we've got rotation, we've got transparency, and we've got varying sizes. So let's try and apply that to our layer. the black one at the moment. So I'll double click it and I'll go to SVG marker and the width variable here, edit. So let's do that again. We click on this little button and go to edit. And for random size, I'll type in rand, an open bracket, and then 1.5 comma, 1.5 comma 3. So what that's going to do, it's going to randomly size each of the SVG shapes between 1.5 and 3. Click OK and I'll apply that. Now you can see the difference there, and it may take a moment on your computer to work. Remember I said I had marker highlighted and I actually had it 50%. So I'll change that 50% opacity and I'll click apply. All right, click SVG marker, go to rotation, click on the edit button to vary it, and this time we're typing rand minus 45 comma 45 and then close the brackets. And what this does, it randomly rotates each SVG shape between minus 45 and 45 degrees. Again, I'm just doing this to play around, give it a bit of variety, and it's completely a play thing, but it's quite nice to do this kind of stuff and learn different techniques. And for a map like this, it doesn't really matter. You can experiment and do whatever numbers you want. So I'll click OK and I'll apply that. This is the thing that'll probably slow your computer down a bit. It adds a little bit of messiness and chaos to it, which is what I was trying to do. So hopefully you can see how it redraws. If this completely slows down your computer, then you might just want to ignore this step, but I like to add it in. Now, if I click OK, and then I'll scroll in a bit to, say, Madagascar area, we can see the randomness in the sizes. If I was to, so when you zoom in as well, as you'll see, they get smaller. So if you zoom in and you want to have a smaller area with larger images, I can go back to the size here and edit it. So if I change that to like 5.5 and I don't know 13, click OK, and then apply that, you can see how we get different size. So you can choose whatever you like here, but let's change that back to 1.5 and 3. Click OK and OK. So there's one thing, if I turn this one off and the original one on, the other one is colored. Now with SVG, you usually are going to see black symbols, and it's not always obvious in QGIS how to make them a different color. So let's take a look. If I double click on the pasted layer and go to symbology and then look at the bottom, so making sure it says marker there, symbology, we're on the marker, go down to the bottom of the layer symbology, and if I go to layer rendering, I have the draw effects box ticked and it's on. So I click the star and I'm using colorize here. So notice the only thing that's ticked is colorize, and the effect type is colorize, and I've got all the settings at the max, and I've got the colorize box ticked. And then in the color box, I just chose this color here. Okay, so I'll copy that color. You could choose any color. That's just the color I want to use. I think it's probably one of the reds from New Zealand's flag. So notice that's the key thing, to colorize in SVG. It's not super obvious how to do it, but it's draw effects, colorize, effect type, colorize, and then I just put all the settings up to max. Click OK, click OK. So let's go back to the previous one and do that. This is our new layer. We go to the bottom of the layer properties to layer rendering. I'm ticking draw effects. I am clicking the star, and here we're going to choose colorize, and then this thing changes to colorize. Usually it says source, but change it to colorize is what we want. Max all these out. Great. Click the colorize box, click on the color patch, and change the color to whatever you want. I'm changing it to what I pasted in. And you'll notice if you paste in a HTML color code and it's not got the hash mark before it, QGIS will add it in. So you don't need to worry about that. OK and OK. And now I'm going to zoom back to the full extent of the layer. And it's going to take a moment or two. And remember, that's because of the rotation thing. So you don't have to have the rotation on. It can slow things down. And you can see on my computer, it's slowing things down a bit, but it will redraw soon enough. There we go. And the last step, I'm just going to export this from the map canvas. Import, export, export map to image. And I'm going to save it as a PNG, and then we will have our final image. So I'll save it as maybe 300 dpi, and I'll click save. Giving it a name, click on save. Okay, it's going to export. It'll take a moment to save depending on the resolution you chose. I chose 300 dpi, but don't worry if it takes a few moments. You will get there eventually. Here's the exported image, so let's zoom in to a better resolution, 100% resolution, and we can zoom around and see the world as New Zealand. And if there's anything you want to delete, like you want to delete New Zealand itself as a bit of a joke to fit in with the map meme, you can do that. In my version, I removed Antarctica in QGIS because there's so many points and it just slows things down. So I'll show you how to do that and then we'll be finished. So let me remove this window. And if I have a layer like this and I want to actually delete points from it, here's what I do. I turn on edit mode, so I make sure I've got the layer selected, so my world points layer. I make sure I've got the layer selected, I toggle editing on, and then I go to my select button, and that's the one that is a square box and the pointer, select features. And then I'm going to manually just draw around the whole Antarctic continent. It'll take a moment or two to select the points and then to delete them, but this is a useful thing to know. So again, we're playing around here, but I'm just showing you a number of different techniques for how to edit data and manipulate styles in QGIS. So it'll take a moment or two to select that because it's quite a large number of points, but we'll get there in a second. The points are selected. You do see little X's over the points. So when you've got things selected like points, you see little X's to indicate they've been selected. And then I'm just going to click on the delete selected button and they'll go away. And then in a moment, the rest of the map will redraw. There we go. All done. I'll stop editing. So I'll toggle editing by clicking the pencil icon. It asks me if I want to save the changes. I click save. Again, it's just going to redraw. What I'll do is I'll double click on the layer and go to rotation and I'll just deactivate that. So look how quickly it'll redraw if I deactivate that and click on OK. So the rotation is probably on your machine the same as mine, what will slow it down the most. But let's have a little tour around. We can zoom in and we can see a world made up of New Zealand's. So that's just a number of different little tricks for styling, symbology, expressions, data editing on a completely pointless map where I made the whole world out of New Zealand. Hopefully some of those things will be useful to you and you can have a play around with this yourself and do whatever you like with it.